Hello, and welcome to Around the Political World with John Rothman. I am your host, John Rothman. If you're a fan of the show, make sure to hit the follow button on the top right of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening at this very moment. When you hit follow, leave a review or share an episode with a friend. It helps other people discover the show, keeps us going. As I like to point out each and every day, it expands our base. The election is over. The result is known. The will of the people has been shown. And let me tell you something. This was a rock'em sock'em election. So let's say a word about the fact that this was a stunning victory for the Democrats and a massive repudiation of Donald Trump. The Democrats swept every level of this election. And that, to me, is the critical message which is being sent. We now face a situation where an election may, in fact, be more important in an off year, and this is an off year, than an on year in terms of indications of what's going to happen. Let me point out that in New York City, a new mayor, Mamdani, and I listened very carefully to what he had to say, and I can only tell you that among the Jewish community, there is an overwhelming feeling of fear, disappointment, and frustration. Not so much that Mamdani won, which was expected, but the fact that people who are not Jews seem not to comprehend how deeply disturbed the Jewish community in New York and around the country is. Let me point out to you that over 850 rabbis and cantors signed letters and petitions saying that Mamdani was not the person they had faith in. Well, now we know, and this is the lesson of the Jewish community, which is a feeling that there is a lack of understanding on the part of too many about the concerns that Jews have when it comes to elected public officials, the rise of anti-Zionism, the rise of Jew hatred, and yes, the rise of anti-Israel feeling. I want to say a word about what happened in California, because it was stunning. Now, you will recall that I believe yesterday or the day before when we talked about Prop 50, I suggested it would pass with over 60% of the vote. And that is precisely what happened. Be clear, this was a stunning, powerful repudiation of Donald Trump and the Republicans. And there was a report this morning that Republicans here in California are even more concerned that they will be a minority party for the foreseeable future. No doubt about it. And let's talk about Gavin Newsom for a moment. I listened to him with his wife standing next to him as he announced the victory last night. And what really hit me is he wasn't just talking to voters in California. He was talking to voters all over the United States. And yes, Gavin Newsom is preparing to run for president of the United States. There can be no doubt about it. And this stunning, powerful affirmation by the voters of California in support of the idea of stopping Donald Trump, well, that was a powerful message, and it was overwhelming. So we're going to have to watch now how this all plays itself out. And now a word about the United States Supreme Court. Even as I am recording this podcast, the Supreme Court is considering the question of presidential power when it comes to tariffs. And I must tell you, I am fascinated by what their decision may be. For Donald Trump, it is the most consequential Supreme Court decision imaginable. Does he, as President of the United States, have the power to impose tariffs? Now, let me explain that if the Supreme Court rules against him, it will essentially limit his presidential power. If the Supreme Court rules in his favor, it will expand his presidential power and the power of future presidents as well. And so everyone is holding their breath. And the expectation is that the Supreme Court will make a ruling sooner rather than later. And that, my friends, will have a huge impact on the American presidency and on the future of Donald Trump. Yesterday was not a good day for Trump, But if he can prevail in the upcoming Supreme Court cases, his presidency will have new life. If the Supreme Court rules against him, he's got a problem. Because, well, you know the term lame duck. It was coined to describe a politician who has no ability to run for re-election and whose power is limited by the fact that he will no longer be in office shortly. That is the case of Donald Trump today. I do not want to underestimate the power of the presidency. The fact that Donald Trump is speaking about setting up in National Guard units in every state of this union a strike force to prevent what he calls violence, well, that's a real concern. How much power should a president have? And I want to come back to saying something that, well, I think is the core of our problem, and that is co-equal branches of government. I've talked about this regularly for some months now, but I want to emphasize it today. The Supreme Court and the legislative branches of government, along with the executive, have to check and balance each other. No single branch should have decisive power, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. So all of these factors are now playing out today. And of course, we should not fail to mention the fact that the president must still deal with foreign policy, that the tragedy taking place in Ukraine, the tragedy taking place in the Middle East, the question of the future of our NATO allies, and, frankly, the question of the world economy, all rest with how this president conducts himself. And that leads me to the final point I would like to make in this podcast, and that is the consequential power of a president. Make no mistake, and I've said this in every election, when we elect a president, we elect more than a chief executive. He is the person who nominates judges for the federal courts. He is the person who influences the direction of debate and policy. And we now have in Donald Trump a fascinating question of the future of the American presidency. I want to point out that I've received emails from many of you about the 60 Minutes interview that Donald Trump did last Sunday. Yes, I found it disturbing. But yes, it also was a candid, clear view of how Donald Trump views the presidency and the country. Well, let's sum it up this way. Yesterday was not a good night, if you will, or a good day for Donald Trump. Tomorrow, the Supreme Court holds in its hands whether or not things will improve. And in the meantime, the great debate in the Republican Party is going to take place. Oh, one more thing. It appears certain that the House of Representatives will be reconvened in the not-too-distant future. And what that means is also important. Will the discharge resolution relative to the Epstein case be finally released? And how many Republicans will, in the end, vote for that discharge resolution? And what are the implications in the future dealing with the Epstein files? Why is Donald Trump so determined to suppress them? What is there in those files which make for such interesting concern by Donald Trump? All of these questions and more, and we'll be talking about them right here on Around the Political World with John Rothman. Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I am John Rothman. Make sure to follow along and let me know your thoughts on the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts and sharing an episode with a friend or colleague so we can continue to grow and expand, which is, of course, our goal. My deep appreciation to Gogo Zoger, who always makes this podcast better. I am John Rothman. I'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Around the Political World with John Rothman. See you then.